Okay, today I'm going to talk to you about a few different things related to Excel. These are meant to be light tutorials. Some of you will be very familiar with all of these concepts. First of all, I'm going to talk about equation input and some simple shortcuts to expedite filling out your spreadsheet. Then I'm going to talk about cell locking and the variations of the cell locking that you can use. Next, I'm going to talk about using goalseek and solver. And lastly, I'll talk about formatting your spreadsheet for printing, and just some pointers. So to begin, I'm gonna use this slope-intercept equation, y equals mx plus b, to fill a table out using the equation input. So one of the great powers of Excel is the ability to assign values to particular parameters. So in this case, I might want to have a particular slope of 3 and a y-intercept of 1. And I may want to change that at some point and explore how it will affect my line. So the next thing I'm going to want, of course, are my x and y values, my independent and dependent variables. Okay. And I might decide to start at 0 and choose to increment by some increment, I don't know what it would be, down to another number. So in this case, let's say I want to increment by 0.1. And I'm just going to drag that down in the bottom corner. Okay, now notice what I did again. In this equation, I said the previous, that is C11 plus the increment I want. I could even define an increment if I wanted. Right? I could say I want dx to be 0.1. And refer to that dx. Now if I only refer to it that way, I'm going to have a problem, right? Because it changes from that to the one below it, and it'll keep doing that, and suddenly it has a value error. So what I need to do is I need to lock this cell. And to do that, you can hover over the variable you want to lock and press the F4 button. Or you can manually draw those dollar signs around the letter. And once you do that, you will have your values. And of course, I can change this to whatever I want it to be. And this, Okay. Now I want to put in the slope-intercept form. I want to use the x variable to calculate a y. So I'm going to refer to x, multiply it by my m. And remember, that's going to drag down if I don't lock it, so I want to lock that. And then add the y-intercept and lock that one as well. Now, you can drag down simply, and you'll get your values, and a quick check shows that, in fact, these were locked. Or there's this little shortcut. When there's a column adjacent to the column you're trying to fill in, you can actually double-click the bottom right, and it will auto-populate knowing how long your list should be. Okay, so this is just a really quick example of equation input. I want to also point out that this sheet looks pretty bad right now, so a little later I'm going to talk about some general formatting guidelines. Okay, so we talked about cell locking a little bit in the sense that we did an absolute lock. So if I'm here and I refer to this top left cell and I lock it with F4, no matter where I drag this thing, it's going to always refer to that very top cell. You see? Well, there are other types of locking actually, so let's erase this and try that again. If I click that top cell, and if I press F4, then press F4 again, notice how it now has the dollar sign only in front of the 5. And let's see what that does. Okay, it looks the same so far. But now you see it moved along the columns. So what that did was that locked the row, the 5th row, but it didn't lock the columns. And as you might guess, if I move that, instead of being here, if I pushed F4 one more time, it's now the dollar sign in front of the B. and it varied the row but not the column. So another way to show you what I mean there is that it repeated that first column over and over again. Okay, so these become useful, particularly when you're talking about having multiple tables that may refer to a particular value in multiple columns or rows that refer to a particular fixed value in a column or a varying value. You'll see the use when you need it. Basically, the short of it is when your traditional locking is no longer effective, but you want to lock something, you'll see and you'll play around with this different anchoring. I call it anchoring, but this different locking that you have. So the double dollar signs is an absolute reference. This one is a row lock, and this is a column lock. Okay, so now let's talk about solver. What I have here is a quadratic equation. All right, and similar to the first one, I have some parameters. Now I have a, b, and c, and I have the function squared. And I've defined these a, b, and c, built a table, and plotted it so that you could see the features of this. Now I've only plotted the positive side of x. So what I want to do first is I want to use solver. Okay, and what I've done here is I have this cell labeled x guess. This is going to be my guess. I have y, which is literally the input of the values of this equation for the parameters I've defined. Okay, and then I have the target, which is what I'm going to try to hit. And I could sit here and I can iterate and I can try different numbers and see if I can get it. And eventually I will probably get it. Or I could use something like goalseek or solver to try to hit the target for me. So let's start with goalseek. So if you go to data, the data tab, and look in the ribbon here, you'll see what if analysis, and what if analysis has goalseek in it. So you click goalseek, and what it'll say is set a cell, and in this case I want to set the y to what value? I want it to be 100 by changing the x cell, and I'll let that go, and I hit 100. Now it happened to go towards the positive of the x's, but being a quadratic equation, there's an equally valid negative number that will also give me the value of 100 for y. Now let's say I want to do the same thing in solver. So let's start it over again. Okay, and solver is already installed in mine. There's an analyze with solver. But if you don't have solver, here's how you add it. You go to File, Options. You go down to the add-ins section. And what you'll see in the inactive application add-ins is a solver list. Now I have it in the active applications, but you'll click on this and you'll click Go. It'll ask you to select which ones you want to install. You choose solver and it's installed for you. Now if you have a Mac, you'll need to do something different, and what I encourage you to do for the Mac is just to literally Google solver, Excel solver Mac, and it'll tell you how to add it for that. So once you have it on, you can click solver, and let's repeat the same process. So what I have embedded in here is I want 115, which is the cell for the y. I want that to be a value of 100, and I want to get that by changing the x, just like before. And I actually made a mistake. I clicked it again and it wanted to fill it again. Okay. Now I've added a constraint here. I'm going to delete that for now and I'll come back to it. Oops. Let's try that again. There we go. So let's see what it gives me. Okay, now in this case it gave me the negative solution. All right. Now let's see if I can manipulate this to make sure it gives me a positive number. So I'll add that constraint back. I'll say the constraint is I want x to always be greater than or equal to 0. All right, let's see what it does when I hit solve. And there's the positive one. Now another powerful aspect of solver is the ability to use minima or maxima. So notice, instead of a value of 100, I could have set the minimum or the maximum. In this case, we know it's quadratic, and from the graph you can see that it has a minimum value. Let's set it to the minimum and see what we get. All right, I took the constraint out, though it shouldn't matter. And now it iterated and it gave me the exact value for x where I will get a minimum y. And that's one of the most powerful aspects of Solver. Okay, so now I want to talk about formatting for printing. So I've made up some data here, just totally bogus, but I have a couple features I want to talk about. First of all, I have it labeled and I have the units. This is very important anytime you're using data, which you typically will be for engineering type of work. You need to include units. Another thing I wanted to show you, we commonly will use the caret for the power to raise it to a power. The alternative to this would be to actually format. This looks nicer, so highlight that number, and you can change the font. So if you click this bottom right button here, it'll come up where you have some more details that you can do, and you can actually set a superscript, and that just looks better to have it actually list the superscript. So once you have that, you can really make your tables look a bit better. Okay, so what I did was I populated this with random numbers, literally random numbers, and I made the table pretty big so that it would occupy more of the print space than I have. So let's talk first about printing. So if we're going to print this file, the first thing you want to do is you go to print and you look at it, and that looks terrible, first of all, because it doesn't cover the whole page. But beyond that, the data looks very messy in here, so we want to clean this up. So the first thing we can do is we can change the orientation of the page. Okay, now does that cover everything? To find out, once you've done that, you can go back and see this dashed line along the edge. That's the print boundary. So it does actually fit now on the page, but it still looks really bad for a number of other reasons. First of all, it'd be very hard to read. Secondly, though we don't know anything about the data, usually in engineering, this is too many significant figures. You need to know something about what you're measuring, but usually you're not going to be able to go to this level, especially in civil engineering type applications. So we're going to want to trim these up. And then we want to make this generally more readable. So what do? Well, first let's start with the data. So if we know, for example, that we're not going to have any more than 2 or 3 places behind the decimal, I encourage you to adjust that. And usually you're going to want to change what Excel gives you by default. So you can go up to the top here and actually reduce the decimal places. Okay, then a good centering is nice. All right, and now the table, it already looks a little better, but it's still not that legible. So I want to point out something. It looks like we have, in this particular data set, we have time, and then we have 3 data points, then we have another time, and it repeats itself. So we have clumps of data sets put one next to the other. It might be useful to group them in different ways. Let's look at how we can do that. Maybe we put a label. All right, but this label isn't necessarily affiliated with what I want, so I can highlight above that entire set of data. I can merge the cells and center them. I could make this bold, for example, and repeat this here and here. And if you like, by the way, if you like a particular format, you can always use this tool called the Format Painter to apply the same concept to all of them. Okay, so now we've grouped them. The other grouping mechanism that I would encourage you to use is the borders. So using borders, we can make this look a little cleaner. We can specifically delineate the different categories. All right, but we really need more borders. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to add a few more borders, and then to distinguish the outer border with the inner, we might want to use something different inside. So if you want to right click, you can choose, well, it used to be on here, Format Cells, Border, and you can apply the internal borders too. something like this. So now we have, and let's use the format painter again. Now we have the borders that we want on the inside, and it's looking a little more legible. It depends what you're interested in. It may make sense to include internal borders here as well. That's really up to you. I would argue doing some sort of delineation. So what I'm going to do here is, so that you can easily read the lines, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold control and highlight every other cell. And in this case, I'm going to make every other cell a darker color. Okay, so now you have a more legible table. The question of font often comes up, and I don't necessarily care. Commonly, people will use Arial. Although you can also use Times or the Calibri, whatever the default font is. You just want it to look nice. Okay, now if we did want to put those borders and shading in the middle here just to add a little bit, you could do this. We can do Format Painter again here. And there you have a much cleaner table. And when you go to File, Print, it will also fit on the page. Okay, so that's a quick tutorial of formatting a table to make it look cleaner and more presentable.